Okay. As always, feet about hip width apart, and again, as always, a nice gentle start, especially given that it's quite a chilly morning. So yes, I mean, I will be, and I am looking at resuming face-to-face classes. University of the Third Age, Forever Active, Changing Lives in Somersham. I will going through processes to do this. I'm also going to be doing some more outdoor classes for the City Council. So in theory, I think we could. There are some complicated things around indoor classes at the moment. The complications are to do with risk assessments and what sort of procedures are required by the venue. It can vary from venue to venue a little bit, what's legally required and so on and so forth. So over the next few weeks, I would expect to begin to have sort of like more definite news about returning to physical classes. But as I said earlier, in part, I'm actually waiting on various organisations to put things together. But I may just sort of take it on myself anyway. So anyway, you weight slightly forward, your hips sinking down. The question asked earlier about, you know, how do we know if we're doing it right is an eternal one in Tai Chi. I think the easiest way is to assume that you're not, and so that therefore you're always looking to refine and to improve. And I find, you know, that my movements are developing all the time. I sometimes say to people, if I'm still doing an exercise or every exercise that I do in the same way now as I was doing it a year or two ago, then you probably ought to find yourself a new teacher, because I've stopped learning myself. So it's there isn't a definite, oh well, I can do this now, because the exercises themselves become the learning medium. But the principles are fairly simple. I quite like the phrase that comes from the old writings in Tai Chi. You know, the movement is rooted in your feet. It's released in your legs. It's controlled by the center of the body. And they say it's expressed through the arms, but in fact it's expressed through the, if you like, the outer regions of the body, arms, shoulders, hips, legs, and so on and so forth. And you get used to a certain feeling of density in your legs. There's a very characteristic feeling that you begin to get glimpses of when you're moving from your center. One of the great things about being on Zoom, actually, is that you can see yourself. So, for instance, if you look at what I'm doing now, my body's turning, and you can actually see, I can actually see that my body's turning. So I'm not just standing here like this. There's a definite movement here. And there's various ways that we can imagine that. I could, for instance, if I put one hand on my navel, I'll come a bit closer. If I put one hand on my navel, then my hand moves. Or I could imagine I've got a little sort of spotlight or a camera, and I'm just panning it around the room. I feel as though I can move fairly freely because I'm here. If I do this, I tighten up, and this is quite difficult. I kind of feel as though I'm being twisted up. Whereas if I sink, I've got a little bit more room there. There's a kind of freer quality. And my arms follow initially just with this sort of sense of flopping around the body. But if, say, we do the second one of these, you hold your arms out. Now here, my arms are basically in one position relative to my upper body. So it's the movement of my upper body that actually causes my arms to move. And gradually we become aware that there's a very distinctive quality in Tai Chi. There's a distinctive feel to the movement. And when that feel is lost, then we're definitely doing something wrong. So it's like you ride a bicycle, you can get on your bike and suddenly think, oh no, God, I need to do X, Y, or Z on it. Or sometimes if you drive a car, you can't exactly say why, you just know that there's a sort of feeling there. And that's an important element. Another exercise which is quite useful, again, a faster exercise, to have one foot forwards. And here you can feel how the legs really move the body for you. So we get used to this feeling of movement through the body, of connection. And you realize that there is this constancy. Although there's a great variety of movements, there's a constant feel from one movement to another. Just as in some ways, if you saw almost any movement from the thousands that are out there in the kind of Tai Chi spectrum, you'd almost instantly recognize it as Tai Chi. And so in the same way, you recognize it from the feel. And have your other foot forwards. So hip width across your feet. About the same in length. Good, and then just shake out. So some things we can check fairly straightforwardly. The width of the step, for instance, here, hip width apart. You can look in the mirror and you can see that. And to an extent from the side, it's a little bit trickier from the side, but shoulders in line with hips. If I come a little bit closer again, you'll see there. If I imagine a line from my shoulder, that it probably works from my ear, but I can't see that because every time I turn my head, I can't see my ear. But imagine that line going down the middle of the arm. It would get to one of these three fingers, the middle ring or little finger, and that would continue down. If you've got a trouser seam, you might find, say, your middle finger on the trouser seam, or those three fingers looking down at the ankle bone. And that gives you more or less the alignment of the body. And when you do that, it may feel odd. You may feel kind of hunched over or awkward, but just remember that feeling and remember to try and come back to that feeling on a regular basis. And get used to it, the feeling, and let your body adjust to it. Another thing we can do, this little exercise, just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. These sort of exercises we find in all the schools of Tai Chi that I've sort of encountered, all the different styles of Tai Chi. And I think they are there to train us in the basic movements and the basic feelings, basic principles, away from more complex exercises, be they forms or tricky movements that we do. It's like, again, if you ride a bike or drive a car and you get on a bike that you haven't ridden before, maybe you borrowed one off somebody. After a few moments, you're sort of get a sense for it because you're used to riding a bike. Now this one, when we start paying attention to the movement, we realize that there's a very subtle change as we go through the movement. We tend to reach a point where we sort of find ourselves tightening up. And that's when we've started to go too far. Remember that this is not about getting big movements. It's about recognizing the difference, recognizing how your body responds when it gets to a certain angle away from the pull of gravity. And so this again gives us both the feeling of the movement, but also introduces some sort of physical reference point, I suppose we could call it, because you begin to recognize where you want your weight to go to, how far it can go. We also recognize that ultimately where we want the weight to settle forwards is just behind the board of the foot, for instance. But it's not necessarily the case that would be the right place now, but it's something that we're going to aim for. At the same time, you imagine you're doing this in water and the resistance of the water holds the arms back. You can see I've exaggerated that, and then the arms follow through. And again, this is always what will happen with the arms. So they'll always have this feel of being moved by your body. And sometimes that gets quite complicated, but this is nice and simple. Well, we often do it at the start of the class. I suppose it's like learning anything else. You learn basic principles in a very simple form, one way or another, whether it be sort of Tai Chi or maths or learning a language or whatever. And then it becomes progressively more difficult as we try and apply those principles. This is a very good exercise for really letting your attention go into your body, feeling the subtleties of what can change, and at the same time having that image of moving in the river. So using the mind to program our body a little bit. And if we then bring in this image of carrying a tray of drinks or pushing the supermarket trolley, whichever works best for you, we now have a slightly more active role in our arms, our hands, fingers. And yet we don't want to lose that feeling of our arms being moved by the body. And there's always a temptation to do this and this and stop moving the rest of the body. And I mean always a temptation to do that. So the best thing is to assume that that's what you are doing and to just slow the arms down a bit. And to feel this connection, feet to hips, hips to shoulders, from your shoulders down through your arms to your fingers. Remember, checking your body, legs, knees, hips, back, shoulders, make sure there's no tightening building up. Recognize whether the muscles in, say, your thighs or your shoulders are getting tired. That will make a difference. And then coming back, turning your hands in, sinking down, without changing the overall feel of the movement. It's like, again, like riding a bike or driving a car. You may have changed gear, may have changed direction, but it's still, you're still riding the bike, you're still driving the car. So that this is all part of what becomes a kind of background awareness to everything that we do. So we start off spending some time focusing on that, then we gradually leave it behind. And in the process of doing that, we eventually lose it. And then we, in a sense, start the whole process all over again. It's very noticeable that in Tai Chi and the other martial arts that I've done, the same phrases get repeated by the teachers in classes over and over again. Whether it's for people who've just started the class or for people who've been going for 20, 30 years, you know, use your feet, do this, relax, use your hips, blah, 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 whatever the actual phrases are. And it's interesting in classes, you can see, you know, beginners are sort of wondering what all the fuss is about, and people who've been doing it for 20 years are just nodding, saying, yep, still need to work on that. So try not to get frustrated about that. It becomes a point of fascination, I think. Things do change, but there's an underlying consistency there. Now going into the wild goose, and see if you can still feel those connections. A little bit more difficult, I think, as the arms go away from the body. We might want to use that image of the bird flying. You might find the image of just waving a feather up and down is useful. Another image I sometimes use with this exercise is, you know, again, you imagine standing in water at shoulder height, and that you've got a little ball underneath each hand, underneath the palm of each hand. And what you're trying to do, you sink down to push the ball down. And then as you come up, you want the ball to come up quite slowly. So you're not just letting it bob up. And so that encourages use of the whole of your body. And then change into parting the clouds. Other images that we might use, say for this one, imagine you're standing on a big long piece of elastic, and that the elastic is attached to your fingertips. And it's the same thing. What we want to do is to just gently draw out the elastic threads. And then as they start to contract, we don't want them just to snap shut. We want them to contract nice and slowly. And then go back to the first one, rooting down, and do these as a little series of 3. These 3 exercises and the next one, when we get to it eventually, are all intended to be done in a parallel stance, facing straight ahead as much as possible. That same upright quality, no shoulders in line with your hips, in line with the pull of gravity. And so, you know, this gives us the basic feeling all the way through. But you may notice changes. You know, sometimes people do something like this, for instance. They go forwards there. Or excuse me, maybe they're straining too much in their arms when they do the wild goose, and there's this little bit of tightening in the shoulders. Same thing with this one. You may find, for instance, that your head flops to one side or another. So doing these exercises in front of a mirror, or indeed a screen with a camera, can be quite useful. I wouldn't recommend doing it all the time, because You don't just want to take an exterior view of the movements. Let's do one more round of this. And then the dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Another thing that I like to focus on is this quality of sung, S-U-N-G. This is really one of, another term that we might use to describe the overall feeling. It's the one that's often translated as relax, but relax really doesn't cover the real range that sung means. Soft, supple, elastic, fluid, calm. These are all ideas and terms that we might associate with the term sung. And that all the way through the body. So does it feel like your body's elastic everywhere? And if not, there could be all sorts of reasons for that. There might be an injury there. There might be an old injury there. It might be that you're doing something wrong. So for instance, if every time your left arm goes up, there's a tightening in your shoulder, but you're not getting it in the right side, have a think about what you're doing on the two sides and notice what else you might be doing on one side that you're not doing on another. There's often a difference between one side and another. Do one more on each side. Now, before we go into pushing in 4 directions, just place a hand on your belly here, just over the navel, palm of your hand over your navel. Sink your hips and turn in your hips and your waist, not too far. You don't want to feel that there's a kind of pulling or a tightening, so it probably won't be very far, but try and avoid your knees turning like this. And you've got the visual image there of your hand moving. It's on your body, so you're not doing this. So this is a good way to really relate to this center part of the body, the lower dantian, being the sort of command center, the control center for the body. If we now push the arms out to the side, but don't move them, holding them in position, or indeed you could just do one and keep the other hand there. It's up to you. But we can now feel the arms being moved, being drawn around by the movement. And again, this is a quality, a feeling, a connection we want to try and feel all the way through. Now, bring your hands into the center. The first of these movements is probably the most difficult to maintain that quality because it's quite obscure how that connection is there when we push up. But on the horizontal movements, it's a little bit easier. So one way that we might imagine the movement here is to imagine that in that middle part of the body, we've got something like a balloon or a ball, and it gets pumped up, pushing out in all directions, and then the air is let out and it contracts. Pumps up, we expand, and contract. You want to feel as though you're moving and you're working, but never straining. No stiffening, no tightening, no constriction on that feeling of space within the body. That is also something that I think is quite difficult to maintain, because we have this idea about exercise being something that we have to strain for. And as I've said before, I've got no argument with that idea, except that it's not what we do in Tai Chi. To get the correct Tai Chi movements, we actually have to try the opposite, to try to move less in the sense. Moving as far as we can without the loss of quality, without the loss of space, without the loss of song. And just gradually looking for an improvement in that in all ways over a period of time. There might be quite a short time as your body warms up, or it might be sort of like a few weeks, a few months, or whatever. Good. Now, your hands drop down and draw out. So this opening set of exercises becomes progressively a bit more challenging, I think, to maintain those qualities. This one, for instance, that rotation of the arm upwards and outwards can easily sort of create a kind of catching feeling in your shoulder. So we need to find ways of overcoming that. Turning if it's comfortable. And then switch sides. So with this one, your hand stays in the same position relative to your body as you turn. It comes to here, and then when I turn, it goes to there. The temptation is very strong to do this, to get to there and then take it over there. But you see where my elbow is, it doesn't do that. I turn the body down. Now we're going to change to rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. And here we see, again, how the middle of the body functions, rotating forwards in the hips and waist and rotating back, pushing up. So in theory, a very soft feeling in your back, neck and shoulders as you come to the upright position, almost like your head was floating up. One more time. Good. Now, some of you will recognize this, but some of you may not have done it with me. Just place your hands on your shoulders. So your fingertips are touching the shoulder joint and circling your elbows around. So, yeah, you know, sort of like a moderate amount. So to begin with, we recognize this as an exercise for the shoulders. It's quite a nice exercise for the shoulders. But one of the interesting things is, if again, I'm standing closely, if you watch, if I really draw my sternum, the breastbone in, that sends my elbows forwards. If I push my chest out, that sends the elbows back. I don't want you to do this. This is obviously exaggerated. But if you can do that, I mean, you might want to exaggerate it a little bit, but so what I want you to feel is how an expansion and contraction in the chest and the ribs, and an expansion and contraction alternating in the back actually really moves your arms for you. So we make this connection to say the ribs, and then start to go forwards if you haven't done so already. Remember, soften your knees, hips dropping back. Because now we're going to change this slightly. I don't think anybody's done this with me in this group, because as well as what we were just doing, we're now turning the body. So it becomes an alternating movement. You're turning in your hips. So again, you can see, if I exaggerate, shoulders coming a long way forwards here. And moving your weight, so you, when one elbow comes forward, you go into that leg, coming over there. And then from here, actually we'll just do a couple more. We're going to move into bear play. And all we need to do is to let the palm of the hand go down. And just stop for a moment, because inevitably what would have happened there is people would have started doing this rather than this. So let's go through that process again, because it's quite interesting to build it up move by move. So if you remember, hands on your shoulders, just going forwards. We won't do the backward movement. Feeling the opening and closing, alternating between chest and upper back, so that rather than feeling that you have to somehow strain in your shoulders to do this, you let your shoulders relax, and you let the big muscles here in the chest and the back and the energy of the chest and back move your elbows for you. We then move the weight as well and we turn. So this brings in the rotation in the center of the body and the movement of the weight. Now, if you look at what happens here, look where my elbow goes each time. My elbow goes down, elbow, hip, shoulder. It's more or less as close as you're going to get to a straight line. And then to make the transition into the full exercise, bear play, that's all we do. Turn the hand palm out and let the movement push it around. So you can see, without really having to do very much from that initial exercise, my hands are now going around in a circle, which is a natural form of movement for them. I suppose you could argue, and for the moment just think of it in this way, that the main push in the movement is a downward movement here. Notice that my hands are here, fingers are pointing straight ahead. So my hand goes down just sort of by the outer edge of the thigh. Now we make the change to circling arms. And the principal thing here is that the sort of main beat of the movement, if you like to think of it like that, is going to be forwards. So I can just move my weight across and I can push forwards. I don't always do this exercise with the movement of the weight, but I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. And what you could do, if you're not comfortable with the weight moving, is just gradually make it smaller, but you can do it both ways. So no change in feel, or no change in background feel. And look where you're pushing. See where my hand goes? Shoulder, elbow, hand. In fact, face, shoulder, elbow, hand at the end here. See this? See this? And I'm pushing away. Check your movement. At the end of the movement, is your hand pushing away at 90 degrees from your body? If I turn sideways on, can you see here, it's almost like I've stretched out an elastic band. This hand hasn't come behind, it goes directly out, but in terms of the basic direction, it looks like this, but this is an opening across the chest. I don't bring my hand behind my shoulder, I move my shoulder back. One more time on each side. And then change. Good. 1 foot forwards. Again, hip width across your feet. About the same in length or a little bit longer. If you're wondering to yourself what that means, buy yourself a tape measure if you haven't got one. Get some chalk. Measure the width of your hips. Chalk a square on the floor. Maybe sort of like, let's say, the ball of your foot, of each foot on the diagonal corners of the square. And you may want to sort of shuffle it around a little bit from that point, but that will give you the overall area that you're wanting your feet to be in. When you move, you want to feel as though your upper body is able to rest on your lower body. And then you add this image of moving through water, and we're looking to maintain the feeling of the body resting. Now raising your toes and your heel. and then stepping in. Another sort of test, if you like to think of it like that, for the length of your step is that you can get the whole foot down, but you could just bring it back if you wanted to. So you haven't fallen into that. Imagine you're walking on thin ice, testing the ice. Well, imagine what it's like walking in a stream or the sea. You really want to be sure of your footing before you commit your weight. And then on the other side, toes point straight ahead, front toes. The back foot is turned out. Now you can play around with that angle. Now you can see there, with my foot at that angle, can you see the angle of my upper body? It's like, it's a real strain to actually line myself up. So that's too wide an angle for me. It might be okay for you, depends. So what I want is to be able to face the front for the whole time, or let the body move. Now raising your toes and your heel. And then stepping in. Something else we want to be able to do when we've stepped here is to feel that before we move the weight, we're able to push gently from the hip down into the foot. So we were just, well, again, you know, if you were walking, say, in the sea with a kind of muddy bottom, we know instinctively that if we just do this, for instance, the waves will move us around. We don't want to get knocked over. We're very particular about the placement of the foot. And then a few steps forwards or backwards. So again, this is a constant. If you haven't done so already, you can change direction. And then bring your feet parallel. Shake out. So that all sounds fairly straightforward, doesn't it? Oh yeah, both stance, measure it, so on and so forth. I think I may have said, I was with a group of people I know. There was about 8 or 9 of us. Nobody had less than, at that point, 20 years of experience in Tai Chi. We spent an entire morning unpicking this stance and this movement. So, you know, although these ideas are very simple, the practice of them can lead you very deeply into the body. That's before we do anything with the arms. Now, have 1 foot forwards. Bird folds its wings. So this is an exercise that when I do the seated exercises, I do after this one that we did earlier, because it has the same characteristic of connecting the movement in our arms, certainly to the upper body, chest and upper back, but also further down, and ultimately, of course, to the legs. So I think this is another very simple exercise. We imagine that we're doing it in water, so there's always that sense of resistance. And we look to try and feel the connections through the body. Again, I would say that there's a very particular feel to Tai Chi when it's working well. And the absence of that feel is an indication that I need to think about what I'm doing. It might be that the stance is wrong, or I mean, it could be something very big, like something leaning backwards, or the head's gone out of line, or something like that. Or it could be something very subtle. It could even be to do with just not paying attention. Sometimes the recognition that something is amiss is enough to make the correction. And then fisherman cast a net. So I think, I may have said this last week actually, always check what you're doing. Generally, I would say there is always something you could correct, but even if there isn't, the worst that can happen is that the act of checking draws your attention into your body. You make that really crucial connection, once again, between what we think of as mind and what we think of as body. And everything that goes with that in terms of the benefits of the art. And change into pushing a wave. A major difficulty that we have here is with these elbows. It's very tempting to do this. But as soon as you do that, you've broken that connection between your arm and the rest of the body, and it becomes a strain. This is where you want the elbows to move to, there, no further. So in other words, you don't want your elbows to go behind your hips and your shoulders. And if suddenly you're thinking, well, there's nothing happening, then it means you're not moving it enough in the rest of your body to compensate for that. Or maybe it's the other way around, really. You were moving your arms so much you didn't need to move the rest of your body. And then do these three movements in a sequence. And again, notice the changes. Obviously, each movement is slightly different. But there's a constancy that runs from movement to movement. We've got the connection, we've got the sense of the flow, momentum, the energy. Whatever labels you choose to attach to these movements and these sensations. One more round. Okay, same set of movements on the other side then, starting with bird folds its wings. And then fisherman cast a net. And then pushing away. Good, and now in a little sequence. Around. Check. So rubbing your hands together. And then tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Your arm. The other side. Your back. Around your hips. light on your belly. The upper part of your chest. Shake it. Lovely. So, stand in. One thing I would say about the going back to this, am I doing it right question. Sometimes I've been with one of my teachers, and they said, no, do it like this, and it feels awful. And don't assume that you will automatically do it right. Sometimes I find myself thinking in situations like that, it's not how I want to do it. Other times I'm thinking, yeah, okay, so now I've got to train to work towards that. And so it's really important that we relate to these feelings within the body. The movement should feel comfortable. We shouldn't feel that we're asking our body to do something that is going to hurt it, if that makes sense. So this is why I try and emphasize things like that feeling of space, for instance, that I've described in the past and so on. And then just sinking down. So embrace tiger, return to mountain. This brings us back to this basic standing position, which is not a bad thing to practice. This is central equilibrium. And so, again, this feeling is one that we want to try and maintain all the way through the different movements. And a good way to hardwire that awareness is simply to stand in that position. Feel how your body is responding. One more round. And stand. Brilliant. Thank you very much as always, people. So keep a lookout on the email bulletins for what's happening with face-to-face classes and changes in schedules and so on and so forth. But we'll still be doing these classes over the next few weeks. And any changes will be done moderately. So, okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Mike.
So take care, everybody, and I'll see you all soon, I hope.
Thank you. Bye then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.